Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Inshallah, in today's class, we will continue with the qawadah, with the critiques of the rational legis. Inshallah, we are going to do 6 through 10. And the reason we're doing more is simply that they're not as detailed as the other ones. The first 5 were very detailed. I think in one of them, it's almost as much as sort of like all of the other ones combined or something like that. That's not an exact statistic, but you get what I'm saying. So number 6 is acting on what the proof proves. So it's sort of like a necessary derivative of, well, if you say this is the proof, then it also proves such and such. And we're going to talk about that. There are 3 examples of that. And actually, alhamdulillah, in the text, he gives us those 3 examples. So that one is a kind of like a nice, neat conversation. Number 7 is a little bit short, critiquing the link between the ratio legis and the ruling, and critiquing the ability of the ruling fulfilling its goal. So this is sort of like identifying that there's a weakness in the illah, and or it might not even exist, or it's not apparent, things like that. Number 8, that was 6, yeah. So number 8, the difference between the branch legal issue and the original legal issue. So showing that in the process of qiyas, remember we're bringing the branch to the original one because of a shared illah. So showing, well, it's actually, this branch is really not like the original legal issue that you have. There's a difference between them. And then in that we will also give some examples of critiques back and forth between school A and school B, the affirming school and the negating school. Number 9 is a failure to establish. A failure to establish the ratio legis, that is, and that what has been presented is not enough to establish the ruling that you think. And then number 10, the final one for today's lecture, is a false conclusion. And this is basically a conclusion that you've done all of the legal mathematics, but then your answer is against a Quranic text or against the Sunnah or against Ijma or something like that. Of course, there's an ability to critique, because I'll say, well, what you think this is countering in the hadith, well, actually that hadith has a weak narration, or there's a jarh in a certain narrator or something like that. So those are the main topics for today's lecture. We'll begin inshallah in the next clip. So we begin the way we normally begin, which is to turn directly, let me just get my page number here, directly to the original text. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. قال المصنف رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلومه في الدارين آمين. Shaykh al-Islam Zakaria al-Ansari, he says, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on him and may we benefit from his knowledge, Ya Rabb, in this world and in the next. Number 6, القول بالموجب. Acting on what the proof proves. So let me read a little bit up until the. Let me read the ta'rif, the definition, and the first example. وهو تسليم الدليل مع بقاء النزاع كما يقال في المثقل قتل بما يقتل غالبا فلا ينافي القود كالإحراق. فيقال سلمنا عدم المنافة لكن لما قلت يقتضيه. Okay, so he says rahimahullah, acting on what the proof proves. This is to accept the proof but maintain the debate. So this requires a broad perspective. You have to be able to, actually one of the things that he'll say, I'll make sure, I hope I highlight it when it comes, but he'll say somewhere in today's lecture along the lines like, if the opposing school says, well, that's not my madhab, you believe the opposing school. And then in the commentary he said, because a person who's engaging in ijtihad cannot lie. So this reminds us that there is a spiritual level, an internal level of safa, of purity, that is required to do all of this work. So here it is feasible and very, very conceivable that you agree with what the other person says, but like, I agree with what you said, but there are some conclusions. So that's what he says. This is to accept the proof but maintain the debate. So for example, as Shafi'i argues regarding the muthaqqal. The muthaqqal is a type of blunt instrument. a blunt instrument that is not, if I pick up a chair and I throw it at somebody, the chair is not usually used to kill somebody the way a gun or a knife or a sword is. But if the person, la qadra, may Allah Ta'ala protect us, is killed, there's going to be some major legal implications to that. So a Shafi'i arguing regarding the muthaqal, the blunt instrument, quote, it is a killing with what is usually used for killing, so it does not negate reciprocal punishment, like in the case of death by fire. Sorry, the blunt instrument is used for killing, unlike a weapon. I misspoke. So let's say I struck someone with a hammer. Okay, well, you can kill somebody with a hammer. Involuntary manslaughter, that's with if I threw a book, I think in the fiqh class I even gave this example. If I took my book, and I threw it at somebody and the spine hit somebody here. I might even use this example, hit someone here. Well, I mean, the book is not used for killing in a normal situation, but it can happen. Here the muthaqal is a blunt instrument that is used for killing. So let me just say that again. The Shafi'i argues regarding the muthaqal, it is a killing with what is usually used for killing, so it does not negate reciprocal punishment, like in the case of death by fire. So there's a qiyas there that death by fire, may Allah Ta'ala protect us, requires the reciprocal punishment, the qawad, and therefore the Shafi'i argues, well, if you kill somebody by a blunt instrument, which is usually used for killing, there is the reciprocal punishment. That's the legal argument. Now the Hanafi is going to respond in the following way. We agree that there is no difference between killing with a heavy object and reciprocal punishment. So I agree with you, I accept the proof. But I maintain the debate by saying, but what you say about the blunt instrument, but why do you say that the blunt instrument example necessitates reciprocal punishment? Okay, so here the debate is ongoing. I accept that half of the sentence that you just say, but I reject the conclusion that you made from that sentence. Now he's going to give us a second example. وكما يقال التفاوت في الوسيلة لا يمنع القود كالمتوصل إليه فيقال مسلم لكن لا يلزم من إبطال مانع انتفاء الموانع ووجود الشرائط والمقتضي. Okay, yeah. A second example, if one school says there are different ways of killing, for example, tools and instruments, different ways in killing, such as tools and instruments, do not negate reciprocal punishment. So you're responding to the previous one, the debate continues. Well, just because you kill in different ways, that doesn't negate the qawwa, doesn't negate the reciprocal punishment. To which the other school responds, the Hanafi school responds in this case, we agree we agree that a difference in types of killing does not negate reciprocal punishment, but it does not mean an absence of another preventative aspect, and reciprocal punishment is related to all of these aspects. In other words, the Hanafi is saying, well, there could be other issues at hand, and all of those boxes have to be checked in order for the qawad to take place. So that's a second example. And then he says, this is the point that I was saying in the beginning. وَالْمُخْتَارُ تَصْدِيقِ الْمُعْتَرَضِ فِي قَوْلِهِ لَيْسَ هَذَا مَأْخَذِي. The chosen opinion is to believe the countering school in them saying, this is not my madhab. And he says, rahimahullah, he says the following sentence in response, in Shaykh al-Islam's commentary on this. He says, لأن عدالته تمنعه من الكذب وَلِأَنَّهُ أَعْلَمُ بِمَذْهَبِهِ. He says, because being upright prevents him from lying, and he is more knowledgeable with his school of thought. So he's being upright, being adil is a fundamental condition to doing all of the things that we're talking about in usul al-fiqh. And that's why in this book, and in the original book, Jam' al-Jawama, the final concluding section is a section of tasawwuf. Actually, it's aqidah, usul al-din, and then tasawwuf. The two sections that we're not going to do in these recorded classes, because as I said, we're going to talk about, we have our own classes for theology, usul al-din, and our own classes for tasawwuf, where we'll do al-mabahith al-asliya poem. It's a very good poem in tasawwuf, etc. So anyway, but in the book, if you were like doing this full on book from cover to cover, which essentially we are doing, you start by defining usul al-fiqh and all of these terms, and then you end with tasawwuf, right? So it's to highlight that this requires, this is an honest debate that we're talking about between these people. Okay, there's a third example. He says, وَرُبَّمَا سَكَتَ الْمُسْتَدِلُّ عن مقدمة غير مشهورة مخافة المنع فيرد القول بالموجب. And in here he doesn't give the example in the text, but I lifted it from the commentary in my translation. A third example of this is the affirming school being silent on introducing a non-popular example, fearing it will be negated, so it is responded to by offering the obligatory. An example of this is the one arguing for the necessity of having intention in both ablution and ghusl, saying the following: it is an act of worship that requires intention like prayer, and remains silent about ablution and ghusl. To which the opposing school argues, we agree that acts of worship require intention, but intention is not required in ablution and ghusl. So I mistranslated something. A third example of this is the affirming school being silent on introducing a non-popular example, fearing it will be negated. So it is responded to by offering oh, my bad. Okay. Not just respond to my bad. On the fly, we're going to correct this inshallah. So a third example, وربما سكت المستدل عن مقدمة غير مشهورة مخافة المنع فيرد القول بالموجب. So a third example of this is the affirming school the example that I gave is fine, but I just want to translate this part right. The third example of this type is the affirming school being silent on introducing a non-popular example, fearing it will be negated, to which his silence is responded to by the other school. And then the example follows. We'll pick up the discussion in the next clip, inshallah. All right, so I guess number 6 took the whole first clip. So let's see how we do in this one. Number 7, القدح في المناسبة, critiquing the link. So he says, and this is in the text, it's short, but let's see if we can talk a little bit about it. ومنها القدح في المناسبة وفي صلاحية إفضاء الحكم إلى المقصود وفي الانضباط وفي الظهور وجوابه البيان. Critiquing the link between the ratio legis and the ruling, that's 1. Critiquing the ability of the ruling fulfilling its goal, number 2. Critiquing the definability of the description, that's 3. And number 4, critiquing the appearance of the ratio legis. And then he says this is responded to by making the things clear. And let me see. So for example, if somebody says, well, there's a difference between the asl and the fara. So your job is to show that they're related, so to re-articulate it. If you say that there is the ruling does not fulfill the goal, you have to show that it fulfills the goal. If you say that something is not clear, you have to show that it is clear. Like one of the things that he says about being clear is if somebody said, well, there has to be an agreement in buying and selling, and that's clearly not clear in this transaction. And then you respond to that by saying, well, there's ijab and qubul, there's an offer and an accepting an offer. That's the sigha, that's the phraseology of the transaction. Implied in that is acceptance, because no one is being forced. So therefore, it's to show that, is to respond by showing. I guess it is a smaller discussion. So another example that he gives, if somebody says, spending time alone by yourself and dedicating your time to worship is better than getting married. So is better than, we're looking at what is more meritorious. And then you respond to that because more ibadah leads to tazkiyat and nafs, leads to pure self-purification. So you respond to that benefit that you just identified in that construct of not getting married negates many other benefits like having children. To which you can respond, well, that is preserving lineage, and I'm talking about preserving religion, hifd al-din versus hifd al-nasl. So you're showing that there is a tafawut, or there's a difference in how they are related. Okay, number 8, al-farq, which is the differences. ومنها الفرق والأصح أنه معارضة بإبداء قيد في علة الأصل أو مانع في الفرع أو بهما وأنه قادح، وجوابه بالمنع وأنه يجوز تعدد الأصل، فلو فرق بين الفرع وأصل منها كفى في الأصح، وفي اختصار المستدل على جواب أصل قولان. So he says rahimahullah, and here I will lift from the commentary. He says rahimahullah, the difference between the branch, so this is one of the critiques, is that there's a difference between the branch legal issue and the original legal issue. The dominant opinion is that it is an objection by placing a qualifier in the ratio legis of the original legal issue, or a preventative thing in the branch legal issue, or both. The dominant opinion is that this is a valid critique. Its response is to negate the difference and show that there can be multiple original legal issues for one branch legal issue. So there could be multiple illas to one hukum. If one were to separate between the original and the branch legal issue, it is enough to posit a valid differentiation in the dominant opinion. In the affirming school's response to associating the original legal issue to the branch legal issue, there are two opinions. Number one is it is enough, and number two is that it is not enough. Let me see if there's any good examples for you. So the Shafi'i says you have to have the intention in wudu. If the Shafi'i says you have to have intentions in the wudu just like in tayammum, because what is linked between them is tahara, from purification after the hadath. The Hanafi responds that the ratio legis in tayammum is tahara with earth, not tahara with water, obviously, because it's called, even we translate it as dry ablution. So he's saying that there is a difference between the two issues. Another example is the Hanafi says that the Muslim can receive reciprocal punishment for harming a dhimmi, a protected non-Muslim citizen of the Muslim state, or that's sort of usually that type of phrase is usually how I translate it, based on involuntary killing. And then the Shafi'i responds to that, Islam, the religion of Islam, is a preventative from that issue. And that is a well-known dispute between the Hanafis and the Shafi'is, that the Shafi'is do not allow the difference of religion, that if somebody other than a Muslim cannot be harmed because of the situation of a non-Muslim. That is textually more accurate to the textual reading of the primary sources. But the Hanafi madhab is more realistic because, well, does that mean a Muslim can just kill people and harm people in a Muslim state? So it's a very well-known legal issue that we talk about. And this is one of those situations where, in at least my experience in studying law, law, I mean, of modern states, that people are always going to take the Hanafi position, not the Shafi'i position. But the Shafi'i position is very true to the, to the text of the Quran. So again, that's 8. The difference between the branch legal issue and the original legal issue. The dominant opinion is that it is an objection by placing a qualifier. Okay, so there's an issue with the ratio legis that I want to qualify that, and it's different than the original legal issue, and that prevents the link between the two, as some of the examples that we just mentioned. Okay, let me just see if in this my other book here I have another example. Niyat al-Fudu, we talked about that. And then the Qawad for the Muslim and the Dhimmi. Yeah. Okay. Now with those two examples in mind, let me just read it again. The difference between the branch legal issue and the original legal issue. Again, this is number 8. The dominant opinion is that this is an objection by placing a qualifier in the ratio legis of the original legal issue and preventing or a preventative thing in the branch legal issue or in both. Or in both. That's the one I wanted to find. There it is. It was right in front of me. Like if you're transacting something that's very small, like if I'm buying or selling a pencil, you will say that the sigha and the satisfaction of both parties are not necessary in the transaction for being correct. I mean, you're not going to have like a whole document contract to buy or sell a pencil. So that would negate somebody that would say that there's a problem in the transaction. So that's in both. So again, the difference between the branch legal issue and the original legal issue, the dominant opinion is that it is an objection by placing either number 1 a qualifier in the ratio legis of the original legal issue, like the wudu example, or number 2, there's a preventative thing in the branch legal issue, like in the retribution punishment in the Muslim versus non-Muslim, reciprocal punishment between the Muslim and the non-Muslim, or in both, as in the buying and the selling of small items. Okay, and then we'll pick up 9 and 10 in the next clip, inshallah. Okay, number 9. Fasad al-wada'i, a failure to establish. So he says, rahimahullah, ومنها فساد الوضع بألا يكون الدليل صالحا لترتيب الحكم كالتلقي التخفيف من التغليظ والتوسيع من التضييق والإثبات من النفي وثبوت اعتبار الجامع بنص أو إجماع في نقيض الحكم وجوابه بتقرير نفيه. So he says, I want to read it and then I have another book that has some examples. A failure to establish that the ratio legis is not enough for the order of the ruling, such as seeing lightness and heaviness, expansiveness and narrowness, establishing and negating, or finding a text in opposition to the given legal issue or consensus, and its response is to demonstrate the appropriateness. So, some examples, just some, not like a complete list. The thing about lightness and heaviness. A Hanafi will say that there is no kafara in voluntary manslaughter because of its enormous sin. In other words, like nothing can compensate for that. And the response to that is saying that the enormity of the sin requires a doubling or a increase of the punishment, not a decrease in the punishment. So this is an example of seeing lightness and heaviness and lightness. Expansiveness and narrowness. So like somebody would say, zakah is obligatory um, to relieve people's financial burdens, so you can choose when to do it. That's expansiveness. The response to that is zakah is obligatory, so therefore it must be done al fawr. It must be done the minute you have the nisab and you fulfill the hawl, you got to pay the zakah. That's the narrowness of it. Establishing and negating. If there was a type of transaction that took place without the proper contract, sigha, like bay al mu'ata, and then you say, well, you negate that and say, well, you didn't use the phraseology, so therefore the transaction is negated. But then the other madhab says, but that type of transaction doesn't require that type of phraseology. Okay, that was negating, finding a text in opposition to the given legal issue or consensus. Hanafi saying a cat is a type of animal that has retractable claws, so therefore its saliva is najis. And then you say, well, that type of animal, the ratio legis of that type of animal is that the animal is pure, not that it's najis. Like in the hadith narrated by Imam Ahmad, أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم دعا إلى دار فيها كلب فامتنع وإلى أخرى فيها سنور فأجاب فقيل له في ذلك فقال السنور سبع. So the Prophet ﷺ was invited to a house in which there was a dog and he refused to enter. Then he was invited to a house in which there was a cat, a sanur, and then he accepted and he was asked and he said, but the sanur, the cat, is a sab'u. It's that type of animal. So that word, a sab'u, you negate the first argument saying that the cat is a sab'u with retractable claws, so therefore it's najis, and you say, well, no, the word sab'u, that type of animal, is that type of four-legged animal is used in the Sharia text, like in this hadith, to establish that it's tahir, that it's pure. This is in the Musnad. And then Ibn Hajar says, which this is going to be important for the next one. Ibn Hajar says in the Fath, this is in the commentary on the book that I'm looking at, that this hadith transition revolves around Isa ibn al-Musib, who is weak. All right, so there you go. That's the clue of how the Hanafi is going to respond. Well, there's a weakness in that hadith, and therefore we can't rely on it. Okay. Well, I can go on and on with the examples. So I think that's enough to establish some of this. So let's just read that really quickly again. A failure to establish that the ratio legis is not enough for the order of the ruling, such as seeing lightness and heaviness, expansiveness and narrowness, establishing and negating or finding a text in opposition to the given legal issue or consensus. And its response is to demonstrate the appropriateness. Okay, and then the last one for today, number 10, فساد الاعتبار, a false conclusion. He says, فساد الاعتبار بأن يخالف نصا أو إجماعا وهو أعم من فساد الوضع وله تقديمه على المنوعات وتأخيره عنها وجوابه كالطعن في سنده والمعارضة ومنع ظهور والتأويل. Okay, and then he says number 10, false conclusion, which is more broad than the previous one, false establishing. This is not exactly a literal translation, but it is basically to negate the conclusion. A false conclusion in which a particular proof goes against a clear text of the Quran or Sunnah or consensus. Like in the last example that we just gave, the Hanafi is going to say, well, that even Ibn Hajar, the Shafi'i, says that there's a weak transmitter, so we can't use that. We can't use that for dalil. And this is more broad than false establishing, which is the one that we just did, number 9. The one using this critique can advance it over other critiques or delay it. The response to this critique is like the response to a deficient chain of transmission and bringing another textual proof, or that the ratio legis is not clear in the text provided, or providing another interpretation. In my experience, and my experience is just my experience, it's limited, I'm just passing it on for whatever it's worth. Most people that are critiquing one another in the space of ijtihad, fatwa, whatnot, they're really engaging in this kind. The fasad al-i'tibar, because we are a textual people, right? We look at the text and we're very overly obsessed with the chains of transmission. I mean, in a good way. So it's very common that you'll see a fatwa from somebody and then a critique of that. And when I say a critique, I don't mean the fatwa is wrong or bad. I mean, like we said, these are all upright people. But you'll see the critique of that saying, well, that hadith that you're basing it on is too weak for you to make that qiyas. That's basically what he's talking about here. The other types of critiques that we've looked up, and I should have maybe mentioned this in the beginning, but let me mention it now, are things that they can happen, but they're really a snapshot in time. That's how the formative period was. Now that all of these legal issues have been dealt with more or less, not entirely, because we have mustahadithat, we have nawazil, we have new things that are happening. You do find these type of critiques, but very common you find the one that we're talking about. Now, a false conclusion, which is to tease out the weakness of the chain of transmission, and then you're going to respond, well, there's another chain that strengthens this chain. So yes, this chain is weak, but there's two other narrations of the same text or a similar text, and all three of those chains, it's hasan li ghayrihi then. It raises its strength, and then you can make delil from it. Okay, we'll put a pin in it here. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam wa sallallahu ala sayyidina mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillah, in today's lecture, we were able to cover numbers 6 through 10 in the qawadah al-illa, in the critiques of the ratio legis. The first one, which actually surprisingly took up the entire first clip, was acting on what the proof proves, and he gave three very distinct examples. Alhamdulillah, two of them were distinct from the text, and then the third one is from his own commentary that I lifted for you. So hopefully that was clear. And then number 7 was critiquing the link. There are 4 parts to that. Is you critique the link to the ratio legis and the ruling, critique the ability of the ruling to fulfill its goal, critiquing the definability of the description, and critiquing the appearance of the ratio legis. And then obviously the response to that is to show that it is clear. So that one is a kind of a simple one to wrap your head around. Number 8 was the difference between the branch legal issue and the original legal issue, to show that the whole point of qiyas is to find a branch issue that's similar, it looks like, smells like, tastes like the original one. And so one critique is they're not the same, you're missing a point, they're not really the same type of thing. And some of the examples that are easy to remember here are like wudu with water versus tayammum. They kind of look the same, but you can critique that they're really not the same, that there are some fundamental differences that lead to different legal conclusions between the schools. Number eight, that was, number eight. That was number eight, sorry. Number nine, a failure to establish, to show that that's when we saw lightness and heaviness, expansiveness and narrowness, etc. That is to show that you have not established the proper legal thinking and proper identifying of the illah because of those differences. And then number 10 is to draw a false conclusion, which is what I said, really the most common way that critiques are done today, which is to critique the person's use of the verse or the use of the hadith and saying this hadith is weak, not strong enough. And then you respond to that by saying, for example, well, there are other hadith that have other narrations and all of those chains strengthen each other. So it's not daif, it's hasan لغيره. أو صحيح لغيره أو صحيح على شرط مسلم or something like that. But so that's where a lot of the debates you see in the modern day occur. والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.